Marhaban Mauritania, welcome back. We're now up to part 2 of the passive voice. Can you believe we actually got 2 lessons in this? That's hard to believe. So, what are we going to talk about this time? Seems like we talked about everything last time. Well, today we want to focus on passive in verbs with long vowels in them. Now, of course, like everything, we have to have some perspective, right? So putting this into perspective, this is one of the less common things you're going to see. So, as we said, finding roots, like that is the most important thing you have to do here. Knowing the measures, that's very important. Okay, recognizing passive voice, that's sort of less important. And now this is a smaller subset of this. So the point is, don't go forget that other stuff to learn this. Okay, keep this in perspective, and we will give you some rules of thumb which will help you. So, let us review. As you remember, in Arabic, the passive voice, just like most everything else, was done by vowel changes. Remember this? We had kataba, to write, kutiba, to be written. The only difference is these vowels. In English, we do it by adding another word and changing this word so it's very obvious. Right? And we said most of the time you're going to see something like this, right? It's not going to have the short vowels on it. So here we have kaf, ta, lam. The question is that the active? Katala, kill, or kutila, to be killed. Well, let's see, 148 people at least, and tens more wounded. Okay, so probably that is kutila, to be killed. Okay, so now that's pretty simple, but verbs that have long vowels in their root are an important exception, and the fact is, if you're really going to be able to master Arabic, you have to be able to deal with these long vowel verbs. Now, if there were no long vowels in roots, what would the world be like? Okay, it would be something like this. All of this would be simple, but for some reason, Arabic seems to have a real issue with long vowels. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that. So, for example, here is a very common word, qala. You know this means to say. Okay, does not mean to speak. Qala. Okay, well, let's say we want to put that in the passive voice. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we have a little bit of a problem because you can't put these things onto an aleph. They're not going to work. And so we have to know how to turn something like this into the passive. Instead of to say, I mean literally this means he said, to it was said. Okay, so we're going to show you some rules of thumb to do this. Now, the first rule of thumb, and the most important you have to deal with whenever you're dealing with long vowels, is understand this, what we call the slippage of long vowels, which is basically to say, look, when it comes to consonants, in Arabic, consonants, we don't change them, except for rare exceptions. So this kaf in kataba, it never turns into a fa or an ayn or something else. Okay, this ba is never going to turn into a seen or a meme, or that's just the way it is. When it comes to long vowels, for reasons of poetry and sound, they can slip from one to another. So the first thing you have to recognize, now, if you want to be a master, right, you want to be an expert in Arabic, well, you're going to have to know all the phonological rules of what to change to what, why you change each vowel to a different vowel. But if you just want to survive at this level, the first thing you have to realize is that long vowels can change from one to another and still be part of the same root. For example, we're dealing with this word. You should be able to recognize that all of these words, and every one of these is a valid Arabic word, are all variants of this. They all come from the same root of this and in the same measure. It's the measure 1 of this. Ooh, now in English that wouldn't happen, but in Arabic it does. It's sort of like the way foot and feet in English are both basically coming from the same word. Well, this is true in Arabic. So to realize that, okay, the verb is kala. but cowl with this vowel, or kila, right, or kul. Each one of these, you should recognize these can all be variants of this root, and that the vowel will slip. That's the first thing, is when you come across one of these and you don't know, I have never seen this word before, this looks bizarre. Well, what would happen if that long vowel changed? Well, it would be said, well, it's probably related to that. So recognize that. Again, consonants, they don't slip like that. Long vowels, bottom line is this vowel can change into any other vowel or go away based on what comes around it. Okay? So that's rule number one. Rule number two. If you want to get the passive, the thing you do is apply these short vowel rules to the long vowel. What on earth does that mean? Well, let's see. Okay, we know by now to change kataba into the passive voice, you go kutiba, or anything. Katala, kutila, darasa, durisa, and so forth. We could do this with every verb in the language, and it would be so much fun, right? So what is happening here? Well, notice the middle letter is the one that's the issue, right? Notice what we've done to the middle letter. Well, it's changed from a feta to a kesra, from an a to an I. And again, this is going to happen for every single verb that we want to put in the passive. Now, think about this, and this is the easiest way to do it. What does this have in the middle? Ooh, right? It has a long vowel, aleph. Well, what is aleph? Aleph is the long counterpart of feta. This is a. So, if what we want is the short vowel I, but we know we've got this, what's it going to be the equivalent? Well, the equivalent of this long vowel is, of course, E. So we get kala becomes kila. He said, or becomes it was said. You can't be he was said. I mean, depending on the meaning of the verb. Right? Kila. Okay. For example, let's look at this. Okay. These are reasonable sentences, right? Qala inna Misr al-dunya. Alright, and this is actually a saying about Egypt. It's al-dunya, mother of the world. Qala inna, what is qala? He said that Egypt is the mother of the world. Well, that's true. Alright. Qila inna Misr al-dunya. Okay, well, what is this? This is that, which is the long vowel version of this. So what we have here, Kila in Misr dunya. It was said that Egypt is the mother of the world. Well, right, this is more common. I mean, not just one person said this, but it was said, right? Passive voice, it's a saying. But applying our rules of thumb, rule of thumb number one, if you came across this, didn't recognize it, and say, well, it's got that long vowel, I know this word, this looks like it's some version of this, it has something to do with say. That's rule of thumb number two. That's rule number one. Asif. Rule number two is what? Apply the short vowel rules. So instead of a short changing to an I, changes to E. And so you should be able to figure out that this means it was said. And that's really what you have to be able to do. The most important skill is to be able to recognize this when you see it. Wow, you say this is wunderbar. Okay, what about the present tense? Same thing is going to apply in the present tense. Okay, so let's review our present tense. All right, yaktub. Yaktub is the active. He writes. Yuktib is the passive. Yuktab is the passive. Okay, all right. Yuktab. Okay, now this short vowel here, u. Unfortunately, with measure one verbs in the present tense, this short vowel could be anything. But the passive, it's always going to be this. Okay, again, a feta, short vowel a. So now think about this. Yakul. Look at that. And apply it to this. Yakul, he says. What would be it is said? I mean, it is said. Yeah, what would be that? Well, we have this long U. Here we had this short U. So we're going to get you call. Okay, what? Because it's the long vowel equivalent of this. You call, it is said. So let's take a look at an example. And this is actually one of the more common verbs to be used in the passive. يقول إن دمشق أقدم مدينة في العالم. يقول, he says that Damascus is what? The oldest city in the world. Okay, could be, but why is one person saying that? Who? يقال إن دمشق أقدم مدينة في العالم. It is said that. It is said, right? This is like one of the Wikipedia weasel words. It is said by whom? Well, we don't know by whom, but somebody says this, right? It is said that Damascus is the oldest city in the world. Now, let us pause for a moment for a little bit of perspective. Now, if you have been paying attention all along and you've been learning the rules and practicing and doing all the exercises and you're familiar with the different words, then this should not pose a big problem to you. Why? Because you can look at this and say, okay, this is active, he says. This is passive, it is said. Notice if you haven't been paying attention, right, and you don't really know what vowel goes on what, and you never really learned how to conjugate, you come across this, you would easily confuse you call, right, with kala, and you wouldn't necessarily know you're cool. If you haven't been paying attention, you get to something like this and you're totally confused. And this is the reality of what we've been telling you. If you haven't been learning the rules, you come across something like this in writing and you just don't know what this verb is and what it says. Okay. Unfortunately, not all long vowels come in the middle, but the same rule if the vowel is at the end. So let's take an example. Da'a is to invite. Literally, you know, it means he invited. Okay. Well, what's happening again? Let's look at this one. We changed this to an E, the long vowel aleph to an E. So what we get here is da'a becomes da'i. And we were just trying to see if you would note. Okay, you did catch that. All right, good, thank you. We'll put that in there just to see if you would catch it. He invited, he was invited. Now, if you know this is the right vowel ending for the normal, the active voice, then you can recognize something is wrong. If you haven't been paying attention, then you don't know what this is and you just get really confused. Okay, so why? What is happening here? The problem is that we have fewer vowels, so we can't apply all of them, right? Remember, with a normal measure 1, we would have u, I, a, ku, ti, ba. The problem is when we get to a word like this with both of them, is there aren't 3 spaces to put 3 vowels, so one of them has to go. So we have something like this, right? Da'a. Okay, we put an u, and then it should be e, and there's no place for the a, so we get du'ia. Because there's no place for that to go. Now they could have chosen to eliminate, let's say, the other vowel, but this is the way they do it. So if you remember this, right, we were dealing with these e's in the past tense, it's easier to recognize. Okay, same thing in the present. We change this u to an a, all right. Well, it's a little bit trickier in the present because here, yadu, again, right, this is the normal vowel we would expect to see. Yada, now you would expect this, I just want to show you, it gets a little tricky. Oh, you would expect this to be an aleph, right, because what happened when we did this, right? We changed this to an a sound. Well, no, this is an aleph. This is an aleph, but it's an aleph maksura. It's written that way. It's still pronounced the same way. Yada. Bottom line is, you know, this doesn't belong there in the present tense, and so in the active voice. Now, you say, boy, this is hard, man. This is a lot of stuff to remember. Okay, so remember what we said at the beginning. Perspective. Keep this in perspective. This is not the most important thing you're learning. The most important, well, the most important part of this is to be able to recognize it and know that something's wrong. Okay, so, like for example, suppose you came across these two sentences. And let's say you're a little bit fuzzy on your passive voice. You don't really remember which is which. Okay, so what do we have here? Da'a al-ustadh at-talab illa al-hafla. By the way, that's something that's never going to happen. But what do we have here? Invite, some form of invite, the professor, the students to a party. Well, we got two sets of people, right? Two actors. We have an invitation, so probably one of them is inviting the other. So the professor is inviting the students to the party. It can't be passive voice, right? Because we've got two persons, right? This one's a plural, but there's obviously a subject and an object. Now here, da'iya at-talab ila al-hafla. Well, if you didn't remember whether this was passive or not, what do you have? Students invited to the party. Well, who's inviting them? There's only one actor. So this is obviously passive. Okay, so remember, use the context to help you. All right. Now that gets easier here. If a wow is at the beginning, it stays. Now, and you say, what about the other letters? Remember, wow is the only long vowel, the only weak letter that can come at the beginning of a verb. Now you already know this. Why do I say that? One of the first words you learned was this one, wulida, wulidtu fi Medina, Nashville. All right, and we told you the big funny, if you say walada, if you conjugate it this way, it means to give birth. All right, so you know to say wulida. Well, why? Why do you do that? Oh, you know why you do that. Because it's passive. Kataba, to give birth. Kutiba, to be given birth to, or as we would say, to be born. Okay. Wulida, walida, wulida. Right? No problem. Notice this just functions as a wow. Nothing changes. Okay. Here, now we're not going to really use this one in the present tense. So I can't see anyone saying, hey, I'm being born right now. Okay. So let's look at another one. Here is one. The verb wasafa means to describe. Now, in the present tense is yasif. If you remember, the wow drops out at the beginning of a word. This is any word with wow at the beginning. Any verb, right? Wasala, to arrive. Yasal. Waqa'a, to be located. Yaqa, taka. We say taka madinati fi wilaya, Kentucky. So wasafa, he described. Yasif, he describes. Notice the wow drops out normally. Okay. Now, what's going to happen in the present tense? Remember, past tense was no problem. Right? You could do the past tense of one of these the same way you did this. Ooh, present tense gets a little trickier because normally, right, the wow drops out. But what's happening here? We change the to an oo. Remember, and this happens in every passive. Well, if you put an oo here, oo, what is wow, right? It's the long vowel equivalent of oo. So this can stay. And so Yusuf is the passive voice. Now you're saying this is very confusing. So what do you need to know? If you see this, if you see a conjugated verb with the wow still there, it's passive. If you see it gone, it's active. Okay, so you see this has been a lot of stuff. So remember, the bottom line is we want you to be able to recognize these. Have a good guess of what's active and what's passive, okay? And our final rule is look for long vowels out of place that don't belong there, okay? You know, for example, kala is to say. You see something like this, it doesn't look right. Well, don't assume it's a new verb and go looking for it in Hans Ver. If that happens, most likely it is a passive. Same thing with this. Yusuf. Well, you know that wow is supposed to drop, and it hasn't dropped. Why? It's not just a mistake, it's passive. Okay? So, practice the exercises. This will make a lot more sense to you. And remember, keep it in perspective, as does this fine gentleman, my dog Artie here, who is looking up to you for inspiration. Shukran jazilan.